Hello mate, and welcome to this video on Blender. And what we're going to be doing in this episode is creating low poly buildings, or we're going to go through the techniques used to create low poly buildings which you can use in your games or in your renders or whatever you want to use them for really. So here we are in the Blender interface, and the first thing I want to do is just give myself a little bit of space. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring my mouse down over this bar at the bottom here. And when it turns into the drag icon, I'm actually going to right click and I'm going to click on joint areas. Then as you can see, when I move my mouse up or down, above or below the line, an arrow points into either the bottom bar or the top interface. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually come over the bottom bar and I'm just going to click the mouse, and then that joins them and gets rid of that. So we've got a little bit more space to work with here, which is precisely what we want. So what we're going to do in this episode is we're actually going to create a house. So we can actually start with the default cube here. So in object mode, we're going to make sure that we've got the cube selected, and then we're going to press G to grab, and then we're going to press Z, and we're just going to bring that up so that it's above the line. Alternatively, if you have the object selected and you press the N key, you can use the properties here so you can see that our cube is 2 meters square. So with the origin being at halfway through, we can actually just change the Z direction there. So we're now 1 meter. So we are perfectly aligned with the floor, which is a great place to start. So I'm actually going to scale the object, but I'm going to scale it in 2 planes only. And the reason for that is that I don't want to drop below the bottom of the floor again. And also is that I don't want to go too mad because this is a low poly mesh. So we don't need to go down to a tiny level for intricate detail. So what I'm going to do is, with the object selected, I'm going to press the S key, and you can see that the object highlight has changed so that my mouse arrow has now got directional arrows with a dotted line going towards the origin of the object. Now I only want to scale this object along the X axis right now, so I'm now going to press the X key, and what you can see is that a pink line has come along to show that we are set to expand the object only on that axis. So we're going to drag it out, and then I'm going to click the mouse, and that has done exactly what we wanted it to do. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to scale it a little bit more along the Y axis as well. So I'm going to press S and Y, and I'm going to drag it that way. Incidentally, what I could also do is if I press S and I press Shift Z, you can see that I can expand it in the 2 planes at once, other than the number that I've pressed or the letter that I've pressed. So I pressed Shift Z, so it's scaling in everything except the Z axis. And there's a reason that I'm doing this. I just want to scale it to about there, and then that's fine. Now what I want to do is I want to go into edit mode so that I can edit this object's geometry directly. So I'm going to press the Tab key. Now as you can see, we've jumped into edit mode now. Now what I want to do is I want to raise this top face up, so I'm going to press 3 in my number pad to change to surface selection mode, face selection mode, and what you can see there is I've actually got that top face only selected. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to press the G key to grab, and I'm going to press the Z key so that I'm only moving it in the vertical plane. And again, there's a good reason for that, because I don't want to drop the bottom of the shape down. The origin of the object doesn't really matter at this moment in time, but it will do shortly. But we're going to keep it at 0, 0 for now, because we're going to do a little bit of funny business very shortly. Now what I want to do is I want to split this object down the middle. So I'm going to press Ctrl R, and that brings us into the edge loop creation tool. And as you can see, depending on what face or what edge I align with, a yellow line changes direction. Now I actually want the split to go down the middle on the X axis, so I'm going to hover my mouse there. I'm going to press the mouse once, and then I'm going to press it again. If you accidentally move, let's say I'm doing that, I press Ctrl R, I accidentally move the mouse over here and I want to find the center, I just press right click and it undoes the movement and it creates our edge loop right where we want it to. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to turn on X-ray mode like so, and I'm going to make sure I'm in face selection mode. I'm actually going to select half of our object, and then I'm going to press X, and I'm going to delete those faces so that we only have half of our object. And the reason we're going to do that is because very shortly we're going to use a modifier which will mirror it either way, so that when we manipulate one side, we manipulate the other. Next thing I want to do is I'm going to press 2 on my number pad, or I'm going to click on this little icon in the top left hand side here, which would put us into edge selection mode. I'm going to select this edge only. I'm now going to press G and I'm going to press Z again. And I'm going to raise it up along the Z axis to about there. That gives me a reasonably house-shaped object. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to come out of edit mode by pressing tab again. And then I'm going to come over to my tabs on the right hand side here. And I'm going to select the wrench and I'm going to go into my modifiers. Now I'm going to go add modifier and I'm going to look for mirror and I'm going to apply that and I'm going to change the axis to Y. I'm going to untick X and now as you can see I have a solid object that looks like a house, but when I actually go into edit mode I only have to edit half of the object in order to give us that shape, which is pretty much spot on what we're after really. So I can come back in here like so. Now what I want to do is I want to change some pieces of the roof. So what I want to do is press 3 so that I'm in face selection mode and I'm going to select that face like so. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to duplicate that face. I'm going to press S a little bit just to raise it up and then I'm going to press P to separate it into a separate object. Now if I were to come out of edit mode back into object mode, what you'll find is I now have two objects. I have a roof which is also mirrored, and I have my house object down here, which is the same as it was before. So now I can come into edit mode on this object, and I can actually scale this face so that it becomes slightly larger. And I'm going to make sure that my mouse is not too close to the origin of the object. And the reason I'm doing that is because I want to make sure that I have some room. So the amount that your mouse changes the scale of the object depends on how close to the origin of the object you are when you press it. So for example, if I'm really close and I press it, when I move my mouse a couple of inches, it makes that much difference. However, if I move further away and I press S, I now have much more fine control over where that object or how much that object changes dependent on my mouse movement. So now I'm going to press X, I'm going to right click to undo that. And what I'm going to do in the modifier is I'm going to turn on clipping. And what that means is that when the two objects meet, they will join rather than clipping over each other. So now when I press S, you can see that they're now growing uniformly as one object rather than crossing over each other and creating that weird clipping effect, which I think we can all agree is not particularly attractive. Next thing I want to do is I'm going to add some volume to this roof. So I'm going to add another modifier, and this time I'm going to add the solidify modifier. And if I look at it from the side, what you can now see is that there is a little bit of thickness to it. And what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to increase that thickness slightly just to give us a little bit of a rim around the edge there. Now what you'll find is that it may say 30 centimeters there or 3 centimeters there, but when we actually look at our items properties by pressing the N key and going into the view, what you can see is that it's not actually true. So if we come out of edit mode and we select our object, what we can do is if we apply the scale, what it now means is that it's now considered to be 100% of its normal scale at the size it's currently at, rather than being resized and messed around with. So now our thickness multiplier is actually accurate in terms of how thick it is. So I can now say that I want this to be 0.05 centimeters or meters thick, and it will actually be correct. Now if we want to, we can actually just press G and Z and we can bring that back down so that it sits neatly on top of our house object. If you want to get it absolutely perfect, you can press the 3 key or the 1 key depending on which view you're in. Zoom in, turn on your X-ray mode. Oh, it's already on, there you go. And then if you press G and then Z, you can actually see when it's perfectly sat on top of the house. At least when it's perfectly sat on top of the house at the top. What you'll find is because we've scaled it, the angle of the roof is actually different now. So what you'll see is there's actually some poke through there. So what we actually need to do in this is go into edit mode, make sure we've got edge selection chosen. We're going to click on that. And then if we press 3 again, we can now press G and Z and we can actually lift that edge or that edge there up so that it's perfectly aligned with our roof again, or at least so that we've gotten rid of any clipping that was happening there. So if I come out of X-ray mode now, what you can see is the roof now sits perfectly on top of our house. And so far we have created minimal polygons. In fact, because it's mirrored, we've only got 1, 2, 3, 4 polygons on the house, and we've only got 1 polygon on the roof, which is fairly minimal, I think you'll agree. Okay, so that's the basic shape of our house. Now we can start adding things to it. So we could add some kind of eave to the roof. So let's say, for example, I want some kind of eave sticking out the side here. What I can do is I can actually shift right click first to make sure that I've got the cursor where I want. I'm going to make sure that I'm in object mode and not edit mode, so that any geometry I create doesn't add to the roof. And now I'm going to press Shift A and I'm going to add another cube like so. Now I think we can all agree that that's quite a big eave, so what we need to do is scale that down slightly. And then using my rotate view mode, I'm going to just press G and X, and I'm going to move that so that it's more or less in the middle, like so. Now if you wanted to make sure that it was absolutely perfectly in line with the X-axis, you can actually go along here, check X and just set that to 0, and now that is bang on in the center. No problem whatsoever. Which is fine, that's exactly what we want. Now, there is an alternative way that we can do this, which would make life a little bit easier, but we're going to just stick to keeping things super basic this time around. Now, what you'll find with these kind of eaves is that generally speaking, there won't be a back to it. So what we want to do is we want to scale along the y-axis a little bit so that it allows us to poke in to the roof without creating too much more of a problem. So there you go, that's what we've got there now. And now we can add a roof to this. And what we're going to do is we're going to go into edit mode. We're going to press Ctrl R and we're going to add, right click there so that it's dead in the center. And then we can lift up that center vertex, or we can bring down the outer ones, which I think may be a smarter idea in this case. But the first thing we're going to do is we're going to go into our X-ray mode. We're going to switch to face mode and we're going to delete half of this object. Delete the faces, and there you go, because there's no requirement for us to have this object both sides because it's a symmetrical shape. So now if we come back out of there like that, you can see that we have our object, and what we can do is we can add our mirror modifier, and it's mirrored it for us perfectly. Now, unlike the previous shape, what I'm actually going to do, apart from coming out of X-ray mode and just moving it around a little bit more so that it's in the right place. So I'm going to just switch to that view there, and I'm going to bring it down and back slightly so that it's actually resting inside the roof rather than on it, because that would look a bit odd when we come to adjusting anything else. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to make sure I'm in edge mode, and I'm going to just select this outer edge and I'm going to drop that down ever so slightly like that. That saves us having to make it even larger or longer as it scales back into the roof like so. And it just makes it look like it's meant to, which is perfect. Now we can come to our face. We can select that face there, and we can go Shift S, Shift D even, duplicate, and then we can just drop that duplicate up there by pressing there. Press P, separate our object out, and then we come into object mode, and now we've got a roof for our eaves, which is perfect. Now let's select that object. What I'm going to do is I'm going to scale it up a little bit, but I'm going to scale it in everything apart from the y-axis because we don't need the y-axis. So we're going to press S, and then we're going to press Shift Y so that it only scales in the X and Z, and we're going to scale it up by not too much, a small amount. Let's just look at that and we can see how much that has or hasn't affected our object. We press G and Z, we can drag it back down on top. And as we can see there, we've got it overhanging quite nicely. So that's good. And I'm just going to press G and Z again. I'm just going to bring that up a smidge just to make sure that it's definitely not clipping at any point. Now we can add our solidify modifier to that. And looking at it from all angles, I think we need to make it a little bit thicker. So let's go with 0.05. That's giving it a little bit of thickness. And then we're going to G and we're going to press Y, and we're just going to slide it forward on the Y-axis so that it overhangs like that, which is what we need it to do. So now we can see we're getting a house shape coming together quite nicely now. And this is where you can just add these small details. unlike when you're creating a game character where there are so many vertices on the object that you really need to be careful with adding extra geometry, this is a very low poly mesh, so chances are it's not going to be used for close-ups. It's going to be something in the background or something that's seen from a distance. So you don't have to go to crazy levels of detail on this object. The more you add, the prettier it's going to look for sure, but you don't have to worry too much about that. And it doesn't matter if there's little bits of geometry clipping into each other and things like that, because realistically, the user's never going to get close enough to be able to see those things for it to be a problem. Now, as we get more advanced and we do more advanced techniques of game development, we're going to have to look at making sure that these things aren't happening. But for the sake of an object such as this, it really doesn't matter too much. We've got a nice eave there. We could add it to the other side as well by mirroring it based off of the origin of the house. In fact, we can demonstrate that if we wanted to. But I'm not going to, simply because I want to put a chimney on this side of the house to make it look different and keep things looking nice. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to shift right click on this side of the house now, shift A, add a cube, scale this down in all axes until I find a roughly chimney sized size, and I'm going to press S and Z, and I'm just going to make it a little bit longer, G and Z. And what you'll tend to find is that chimney stacks tend to be quite close to one end or one wall, because the actual chimney or the fireplace itself tends to be around the outside. But this is a fairly modern house as well, so the chances are that this is a chimney for a boiler or something rather than a traditional fireplace, so we can afford to be a little bit of artistic license here. So I'm going to kind of leave it just there where it is, not too worried about that, to be honest with you. Now what we could do, if we come in nice and close, is we could actually bevel the edges so that we've got something to play with, or I can create some edge loops. We can make this chimney look as realistic as we want by adding perhaps something on top. So in the UK, I can't comment about houses that are in the rest of the world, that what we do have in the UK is we tend to have pottery chimneys on top of the chimney stack. So if I go to Shift A, I can add a cylinder, scale that cylinder way down so that it actually looks roughly of the right size, and then I can G to grab that and then just drop that in there like so. And it might be multiple chimneys, it might not. In this case, I think I'm just going to have the one like that. I think it needs to be a slightly larger, just so that it doesn't look completely out of place. And if I press 7, I can get a top-down view, and I can zoom in, and then that gives me the opportunity to kind of get it. I can just eyeball it so that it looks a little bit more like it's in the right place, like so. And then we can mess around with this. So what I can do is I can actually press the / key, and then that isolates the object on its own. And what I can do is I can go to Control R. I can create an edge loop when we're in edit mode. Sorry, I have brain fart there. Control R, and now I can add that. Now what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to roll the mouse wheel twice, and that creates several edge loops. Right click to undo the movement, and now what you can see is we've got that going on there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make sure I'm in edge mode. I'm going to unselect, and I'm going to alt click on this, and that selects that whole edge loop. As you can see, if I go into X-ray mode, that allows us to select the entirety of that edge loop, and now I can move it around and do things with it. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to move it up a little bit in the Z axis, closer to the top. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to scale it, and I'm going to bring it in a little bit. And I'm going to do the same thing with this one. I'm going to select this edge loop, I'm going to bring it up slightly, and then I'm going to scale it in a little bit, but not too much. Next, I'm going to do the same thing with this one. Again, I'm going to scale this in so that it gives us a kind of a round shape. Now, this part of the mesh isn't actually visible, because if we bring back the rest of the objects, we will be able to see, and I'll do that in a moment, but you'll be able to see that that is actually concealed from view. What I'm going to do is I'm going to select this final edge loop, and I'm actually going to tilt that out ever so slightly, like so. Then I'm going to come back into object mode. And as you can see there, that just looks a little bit more like an actual chimney. It doesn't matter. I could have made that much simpler by decreasing the number of sides on it. Because it's such a small object, no one's really going to be able to see all of that anyway. Okay, so that's the basic blocking out of our house. Now we can use basically the same techniques as before if we want to create a door. Now I'm actually going to have this being the front of the house, this plane here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to look at creating some kind of porch or window. So the first thing we need to do is block out a kind of shape for the door. So what we need to do is select the correct view. That's the wrong. So I'm going to press Control 1. That brings us to the front. I'm going to press Tab, which brings me into edit mode. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the knife tool to cut out a door shape. So press K for the knife tool. And then what we can find is that we can just click in there. And again, it hasn't got to be perfect. This is a low poly mesh. So if it's not completely spot on, if it's too wide for a door, if it's not perfectly central, it doesn't matter. Once I've gone round the entire shape of the door, I can press Enter, and then that will finalize my cut like so. Now if I were worried about it, I can press Control 1 again, and I can go into vertex editing mode. I'm not in X-ray mode, so I'm only selecting the vertices at the front of the house. I'm pressing G and X, and then that allows me to move along the X-axis. Failing that, I can press GG, and then that allows me to slide my vertices along the edge that they're on. So I can now make that nice and central. And if I want to make the door a little bit taller, I can press GZ, just bring that up so that it looks more like a door shape. Perfect. Now I'm going to go into face mode by pressing 3. Select that face. I'm going to press Shift D to duplicate, and I'm going to bring it out in the Y direction ever so slightly. And then I'm going to press P to separate. And then that's created a door. Now, what you'll notice is that this object has also been mirrored. So what I need to do is come back out into object mode, select my one object there, and remove my mirror modifier from it. And now we've only got the one door, which is what we're after. What I am going to do though is I'm going to add a solidify modifier to it. And I'm going to zoom in so that I'm a little bit closer so that I can see if I press the wrong button there. So that I can see if I've made the door the correct thickness. I'm going to press G and Z, G and Y, sorry, so that I'm moving along the Y axis, and then I can move this in so that I'm nice and close to the house, and we can actually get this pretty damn close with minimal effort. There we go. That's basically now mounted to the front of the house. And you could add a door frame to this as well by just simply adding, if I go Shift right click, add a cube. And we just scale that right down so that it's door frame kind of width. And then we press the period key on our number pad to zoom in into the object that we're looking at. And then I'm going to scale it along the Y axis so that it's thinner. And then I'm going to move it along the Y axis so that it's not clipping into our building as much. A little bit of clip is fine. Now I'm going to scale it on the Z scale. I'm actually going to zoom out a little bit so that I can see what I'm doing. Scale it on the Z axis a little bit more. Move it along the Z axis. Checking that we are not clipping through the floor too much. Again, if this is going to be sat on a surface, it's not going to be the end of the world if you do that. But generally speaking, good practice. Try not to clip through too much. Now what we can do is we can actually create a join between this plane and the object that's going to be the lintel. The lintel, for those of you who don't know, is the bit that goes across the top of the door. So what we do is select this object, go into edit mode, and we're going to select this one face, and then we're going to rotate it along the Y axis. So we're going to press R, and as you can see, it's freely rotating at the moment. If we now press Y, we can actually rotate it along the Y axis. Now the problem with doing it this way is that it does get narrow at the top. So in hindsight, I'm actually going to right click and I'm going to undo that. And all I'm going to do is I'm going to extend this up a little bit further and then extrude out the next part of our object. So I'm going to press G and Z, lift this up nice and high till it's about right there. I would say that's probably about right. And then what I can do is I can press Control R, click, and then drag it up so that it's level with the top of the door. It's okay if there's a little gap because it means that we can add an emissive surface behind the door. Now what we can do is press 3, select this object here, and we can extrude along the x-axis, like so, and then we can come out. And then if we go into Control 1 view again, so that we're in an orthographic view, what we can actually do is more or less get this spot on so that we are ready. And now if we press Control R again, we can just hold the click down there, pop that there like so, select this face that we want here, but making sure that we've got a face selection mode selected by pressing the 3 key. And if we press E for extrude, Z for the Z axis, we can bring our objects down. If we right click just to make sure that we're actually in the right place, let's have a look. Never do things that are off screen. Select that face, press E for extrude. It's on the Z axis. And then we can just line that up roughly on there. So now we've got a door frame. Again, it doesn't matter if it's perfect or not because it's a low poly mesh. We could have messed around and mirrored it, but again, doesn't matter. Got a door frame and a door, separate objects, which is going to open up options available to us later on when we get to adding more detail in perhaps another video. But for now, that's what we've got. We've got our blocked out house. We've got the marking for where our door is going to be. If we come out of edit mode and into object mode, and if I shift right click out elsewhere on the screen, you can see that those meshes actually look pretty good. For a very basic shape, we are in pretty good looking shape as it is. Anyway, I hope you found that useful, guys. Let me know what you think in the comments below. We'll continue this build in another video, and I will see you in that video. But until then, you take damn good care of yourselves, alright? Bye bye.